What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. Ian Cummings here with my good friend, NFL Draft Fantasy Analyst Derek Tate. We are under 2 weeks away, Derek. Exciting time. We are under 2 weeks away from the 2024 NFL Draft, and I'd be hard-pressed to remember a draft cycle where there was this much anticipation building up to the event. We don't know what's going to happen, but we are having so much fun breaking it down. We had a mailbag last week. We had a QB checkpoint the week before. This week, another exciting one for you. Final top 300 big board. I finalized it yesterday. My top 300 yesterday. I'm still working beyond it. I'm still watching some FCS guys, so I'm going to keep adding to it past 300. But the top 300 is set, and it was a massive undertaking for sure. It was a lot of cross-checking and looking back and reevaluating, but we're finally to that point, and we're going to break it down today. The top players, the top 25, some day two sleepers, and then some of Derek's favorite players who are ranked maybe in the ranges where they could be value deals. We're going to talk about all of that. But first off, Derek, under 2 weeks to go. How you feeling? Are you bristling with excitement?
Oh, man, it's almost as if I'm a kid again, and I'm 8 years old, and I'm trying to get to sleep on Christmas Eve. And I'm having trouble sleeping every night. And I've got to tell you, man, I'm having a little bit of trouble sleeping. No, I'm juiced up. I think this first set of 10 picks in this draft is going to be very, very interesting. Does anybody trade up for JJ McCarthy, Romo Dunze, maybe even Brock Bowers? Who knows what's going to happen in those first 10 to 15 picks? So yeah, no, I'm juiced up. And the fact that you had to rank them all 300, I just get to critique and react to the one Ian Cummings rankings big board. They didn't task me with it. Again, part-timer, contractor, contributor. But no, I'm really excited to dig into your top 300, man. I imagine that is a huge amount of work that's went in, and it's kind of the fruit of your labors over the last year or two of covering these prospects.
Yeah, and I'll have to go back and check and see how many we were able to get reports on this cycle, because I'm pretty sure it was over 150. So that's a solid number for sure. And your help on the fantasy side with QBs and wide receivers and running backs and tight ends was phenomenal as well. And we'll get into some of the guys that you're higher on that are maybe in the 100s. There were a few guys that I was looking at as I was ranking it. Like, I would have loved to fit this guy into my top 100, but he fell out by just a little bit. So it's going to be a fun draft, a lot of value across the board. Let's start with the top of the class, though. Top of the class, yep. I had, I think, 12 or 13. I had 12 prospects with blue chip grades, over a 9. So a really strong class up top. You don't usually see that. I remember going back to the class that had Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker. I didn't have a single one over a 9, that class. And we have 12 this year. So it kind of speaks to how strong this group is at the top, man. My board started out, I've had Marvin Harrison Jr. as my top overall prospect for a long time. And in this final update, I swapped Drake Maye and Caleb Williams over him. So it's Drake Maye number 1, Caleb Williams at number 2, and Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 3. And my thought process was, if I was a team that had an equal need at QB and wide receiver, who would I take first, right? One of the QBs or Marvin Harrison? I would take the QB, right? I think if you get to a certain point, if those QBs are over a 9, I think that's a rule that I'll implement for myself in the future. If they're over a 9, just put them at the top of the board, because you're not picking anyone else before them. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is my top non-QB. And he graded over 9.5, highest graded receiver ever in my 3 or 4 years of doing this. Number 4, Joe Alt. Number 5, Brock Bowers. Number 6, Malik Neighbors. Number 7, Dallas Turner, top defensive player, edge from Alabama. Number 8, Roma Dunze. Number 9, Olu Fashanu. And number 10, Terrion Arnold from Alabama. And then the final 2 blue chip guys, Taliese Fuaga from Oregon State at 11, and Johnny Newton, number 12 from Illinois. So thoughts on that top group? I know it's a lot of blue chip talent. I think if you're a team in that top 12, right, it's a great class to need that. But also, if you're a team later on in the teens, I'm looking at Jayden Daniels, JJ McCarthy. We know they're going to go top 5, and I think they're warranted for consideration in that range, but they're just not quite as highly graded for me as the Drake Maye or Caleb Williams. So, if you're a team like Jacksonville or Pittsburgh or Los Angeles, the Rams, you could be looking at a potential blue chip guy falling to you, and I think that's an exciting opportunity this year.
No, definitely an exciting opportunity. I'll ask, when it comes to Jayden Daniels, I know we had a deeper discussion about the quarterback position, right? And, his lengthier stay in college certainly kind of comes into play when you're directly comparing him to, Caleb Williams and Drake Maye, who are both early declares. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that really concerns you that prevents him from kind of getting in that blue chip range as far as what you've seen on tape? Just that knocks him out of that top 12 just a little bit, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I think, and to be fair, he's graded in a similar range to Bryce Young for me last cycle. So still a guy who's in the top 15, still a guy who is worthy of top 5 capital for me. And I do think he has a little bit higher upside as a creator than Young did, because obviously, we talked about the athleticism on this guy, right? Like when he gets out in open space, I think he hit 22 or 23 miles an hour at one point. So that speed, man, you can't replicate that at the QB position. And then he's got the agility and the lateral freedom too. I've seen Robert Griffin III as a comp for him at times, and I think he's more athletic on the lateral plane than Griffin was. Griffin was a guy, when he got moving in a straight line, he could go. But I think Daniels is a lot more agile, a lot more free flowing. And that's exciting because there's a lot of creation upside with that. So the athleticism, the deep passing ability, the accuracy on the vertical plane, I think for me, the biggest thing was he only scored a 7 for arm strength for me and only a 7 in arm elasticity. I don't see the same angle freedom or ease of velocity generation in multiple phases than I do with Williams and May. I think Williams is obviously, his is well marketed. We know he can do it. But I think Drake Maye gets really undersold for how good his arm talent is, not just the arm strength and the velocity, but also off platform. When he's on the run, he's so good at adjusting his arm angles, generating velocity and torquing his hips off platform, off script. Yeah. And for his size, like it's uncanny. It's absurd. So I think they bring a level of composite arm talent that I just don't quite see with Daniels. And that's probably the primary factor that knocks him down. The frame's a little lighter. The decision-making in heat of the moment, pressure situations can improve a little bit. There are times where he needs to preserve his frame and he doesn't, right? But those are minor issues to me compared to the lacking arm strength. And also there are occasional lapses in anticipation over the middle of the field. I don't think it's an issue that's going to make him a liability at the next level, but it is something that does dilute his ceiling relative to guys like Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. So that's the long form answer. I was really struggling to find a comp for him because he's such a unique player. But I think you look back to Tyrod Taylor coming out and the tools that he had as a runner, right? A little bit taller, narrow frame, narrow mechanics, right? But then really agile, explosive. I think he ran in the 4.4s, so Jayden Daniels kind of tracks with that. But I think Jayden Daniels can represent, because we know Tyrod Taylor, right? When he was in Buffalo and he got to stay a starter for a few years, he did make a Pro Bowl. He was a decent starter for a short window, right? But then they decided to transition to Josh Allen, get that higher upside player. I think Jayden Daniels can be better than that. I think he can be better than that pretty early in his career in the right situation. I think Washington would be a good fit for him with the vertical passing game, the spread offense. I think New England could be a good fit for him. I think you're looking at a guy who has Tyrod Taylor physical ability, right? But I think the passing ability can be more consistent on both the intermediate, the short, and the vertical plane. So a lot of excitement, but there's some diluting factors for him too.
Yeah, I see what you see with the Tyrod Taylor, comp. I think maybe if you shot Tyrod Taylor with some adrenaline and kind of turbocharged him a little bit. That's where
the comp that I landed on was like Tyrod Taylor 4.0, right? Because he's not Tyrod Taylor as a thrower. He can easily be a better thrower, but the physical profile, the upside, from an athletic standpoint, that's kind of what aligned best for me.
Yeah, I don't see that as an insult. Like I thought Tyrod Taylor was a good player, but if you're telling me that you see him athletically comp to Tyrod Taylor, but a better passing prospect and could develop a higher ceiling, then that makes sense. And kudos to you for going with Drake Maye over Caleb Williams. Man of your word and true conviction. And no, I love it. I said he has the highest ceiling of any quarterback in this class, and it's right there with Caleb Williams. I still have Williams slightly above. Again, I'm nitpicking. We already kind of talked about it, but the courage of the conviction of the top 300, there sits Drake Maye at number 1, man. Tip of the hat.
Yeah. And it's one of those things like most people have Caleb Williams QB1, and I can absolutely see that. Like I've said before, they're basically tied for me. They're that close. It's bad. I wanted to flip around, but the more I think about it, like I can't quit Drake Maye and the physical upside again, but then also the anticipation ability, right? The leverage IQ. I mean, there's so many of the little things. I know we can clean up his mechanics, right? But I've said it before. I think we and if you want to listen more, listeners, you can go back to our QB Checkpoint podcast a few weeks ago. We talked at length about these guys. So, but Drake Maye, in a gist, I think a lot of the things that he needs to work on as a young QB are pretty easily fixable compared to the mental traits that he shows, the leverage IQ, the anticipation, the processing ability, and then the active DB manipulation, where he has shown that he can control his mechanics to misplace DBs and open windows for himself and then capitalize with those high-end tools. To me, if he can reach his ceiling, there's no QB with the same upside as him in this class. Even Caleb Williams, as good as Caleb.
There's evidence that he can do all these things. There's evidence on tape that he can do all these things. It just needs, and then there's also evidence where he just needs a little bit more polish and a little bit more work. If the right coaching staff in the right situation gets their hands on him, sky's the ceiling. Sky's the limit. I guess that's the saying for Drake Maye.
We could change it to sky's the ceiling. You've got some alliteration.
That's pretty good.
Alliteration. I know Ali would be all over that for sure. But so I think the QBs, bottom line, I think any of these top three guys are definitely worth the pick in the top 5 range, even though Jayden is a little bit lower for me. JJ McCarthy is a little bit tougher sell, but again, I can see it because he's 21 years old. He's very talented. He graded out as my 26th overall player. So after that bracket of top 25, which again, in this class, fitting into the top 25 it's an achievement for sure. This class is very strong at the top. So I think to be in that range is very good. And then JJ was just outside at 26. I think, he's going to get elevated because again, he's young, he's talented, and all the reviews of his character have come back glowing, right? Dane Brewer did some great work with the Beast where, there was a quote from a coach who said literally, he was telling recruits when he came to Michigan, if you're going to come here and party and not focus on football, go somewhere else because we're trying to set the standard here. And they did. They won a national championship. So he talked and then he backed it up. He's got the talent for sure. The arm is there, the athleticism, and the flashes of anticipation and fearlessness testing the middle of the field are really exciting with him. The thing is, the processing, the field vision can be very hot and cold. So can the decision making. And, usually that's when he's asked to put a little bit more on his plate, right? NFL teams are going to ask if we need to ask JJ McCarthy to elevate our team and put us on his shoulders to win this game. Can he elevate? Can he do it yet? He hasn't really been asked to do it, but I do think the upside is there. So I can see why they're going to invest in him. And then I think I had Michael Penix. I'm going to check here. Hang on a sec. I'm going to check. I had Michael Penix Jr. at 33 and then Bo Nix at 35. So that's rounding out the top 6 QBs. I think one of them goes round 1, but it's tricky to say who. What are you feeling about that QB group and how they're ranked here?
Outside of we already kind of touched on the rankings of them all. It's tough because you mentioned with the argument over Caleb Williams, Drake Maye over Marvin Harrison Jr. The positional value, if you hit on one of these quarterbacks, is obviously the reason why a lot of that position goes so high every single draft, right? So, ranking them, where you ranked them, it makes sense to me. I mean, I feel like we have an incomplete grade on JJ McCarthy. Yeah. Sure, the flashes are there, but can I definitively say that I know that he's going to be a better NFL player or NFL prospect than someone like Cooper DeJean, who's one of my guys? No, I can't. I think Cooper DeJean it's tricky because it depends on what you want him to do. And I think he can do pretty much anything you want him to do in your secondary outside of just, asking him to do nothing but bump and run, press man coverage all the time. I think the best way is he's kind of serviceable in that aspect. I think he can. I don't know if I see him as a liability in that regard, but that's the only type of defensive structure that runs a ton of press man is the only thing where I don't know if I see him being able to be effective on the outside all the time in that type of role. But you get him in any sort of cover 3 shell or ask him to work the slot and fill the alley or, even as a deep high safety, being able to fill the alley. I think he actually acts better as a run supporter out of the slot as kind of like playing the edge and setting the hard edge and shooting gaps on outside run concepts. I love Cooper DeJean. I feel more comfortable that he's going to be an high impact player in the NFL than JJ McCarthy, who, the flashes are there, but it still requires a lot of projection, Ian, which is why I'm totally okay with where you have him on your board.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part, right? Because I was trying to figure out where to place him, as I always am with these fringe quarterbacks. With Will Levis, it was a tough exercise last year, too. Where do you place this guy? Because he's outside of the top 3. We know this. But at the same time, there is that first round talent, ability, right? It's just a matter of how do you balance that. And, with guys like Drake Maye, it's very easy to see. I compare it to my conversation with Anthony Richardson last year, because Richardson graded out very high for me. And, just looking at the athleticism and the talent and then the flashes of operational utility. I think Maye is a lot farther along than even Richardson was. So that's kind of validation for that. But with JJ, you don't quite see that consistency as much. I think what he does do well fits very well with, say, a Shanahan or a McVay offense. And that's why you see him mocked to, the Vikings a lot, right? It's one of those things where he's very, good. He's got clean mechanics, very clean rotation, accurate in the short ranges, really crisp release again. And then he can anticipate and work the middle of the field in the short range. So I think those things, what he can do well, it fits that. So you're looking at that and you're saying we can insert him into our offensive scheme and have that play off of him and incubate his growth early on. But at the same time, if you need him to throw a deep post, right, very inconsistent with identification and trajectory over there, and then the field vision can just be streaky as well. So, you're not working with as much of a guarantee. So when I look at guys like, Cooper DeJean, like you said, who's going to be a very solid pro, probably all of these edge guys, Jared Verse, Laiatu Latu. You got guys like JC Latham, Kool-Aid McKinstry as well. I have Chop Robinson higher because I think he can be a game wrecker with his athleticism and his, compact power profile. It's really tough to rank those guys and then file JJ McCarthy into it because there's still so much we don't know about the valuation of McCarthy as a prospect. So it's tough, but bottom line, I do think they all landed in my top 30 first round grades for me. Let's move on to early day 2. Well, first off, any other rankings that intrigue you in this group? I know the wide receiver grouping is one of those where after the top 3, it gets a little subjective. I had Brian Thomas Jr. at 17 overall. Xavier Worthy was my wide receiver 5 at 27. I slotted him over A.D. Mitchell at 28th overall. And then I think I had Jalen Polk at 36, Keon Coleman at 38 or 37, Lad McConkey at 39, and then Xavier Legette rounding up the top 10 at 43. Top wide receiver thoughts.
There's a lot. Well, the top wide receivers, every single player you just named has a legit chance to have first round draft capital. That's how deep this class is. And I mean, it's kind of pick your poison. Xavier Worthy, maybe it's my fantasy brain that is preventing me from, fully putting him like as the wide receiver 5 or 4 in this draft class, because I think he's going to be able to help an NFL offense more than he's going to produce insane fantasy numbers just because of his limited size. But that necessarily isn't the case if the right situation falls upon him, like cough, goes maybe to Buffalo or something like that. And you got him paired with Josh Allen in a target room that's, fully up for grabs. I see it all with Xavier Worthy. And I don't think he's just a one-trick pony that just gets vertical. I think he's got a lot more route running nuance, and his ability to hit you with different moves at the top of his stem. His stem IQ is there, and he was productive all 3 years. He stepped on the field at Austin, Texas, and produced as a true freshman. So it's just A.D. Mitchell. I probably prefer his game just a little bit more, but pick your poison. What do you want? Do you want the outside X receiver? Do you want a movable weapon that can vertically stretch the defense? I mean, a lot of these guys can do a lot of these things. I mean, I'm a little higher on Lad McConkey. I have him slightly above Jalen Polk, but all these guys are great, dude. It's going to be fun to watch where these wide receivers go on day 1 and day 2.
Yeah, and it's going to be a class where landing spot's always important, right? But I think this class in particular, because there are so many different names, where do they go? That's going to be such a big projection element for sure. Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell was one of the toughest decisions for me, because I think A.D. Mitchell has the more complete physical profile with the size, right? And he's a very good route runner. For me, I thought about it like, if they're basically tied for you and one is the generational speed threat who can threaten DBs with that speed, if another is the, just violent route runner who can separate and sink for his size and extend beyond his frame, the effort concerns with A.D. Mitchell. They're not pressing. They're not liability-esque, right? Like it's only every so often. It's only, something that you make note of and be aware of. But it was enough for me to say, like, I feel like I can use Xavier Worthy more in a versatile light. Like, I think he can be that movement Z where I can get him the ball on sweeps and jet motions, right? Or I can have him run vertically. I can have him run in breakers, out breakers. A.D. Mitchell might be a little more confined as an X receiver. And then even then, when he's not getting the ball, is he going to give 100%? Is he going to fake out that DB? It was enough for me to say, like, how can I quantify this? I can put Xavier Worthy over him at 27. That's how I can quantify it. A.D. Mitchell is still in my top 30, but there are some questions there that you would like to answer. So that was kind of my thought process.
Yeah, no, I like the thought process when it comes to maybe that tiebreaker for you, right? If you have similar grades on them and, the skill sets you can see both of them succeeding in the right situation for sure. It's, the effort, maybe the lengthier track record, quite frankly, for Xavier Worthy over AD Mitchell, who really didn't break out until his final year in college. So another guy it's polarizing, Keon Coleman, at 37 for you. I could see a case where that's too high, and I could see a case where that's too low. It's how is an NFL how do you think an NFL offense is really best suited to use him? Because obviously the separation concerns are there, right? The vertical speed is I think once he gets up to speed, he ran over 20 miles per hour in the gauntlet. So I don't think that he's a slow player by any stretch, but he's just not a vertical burner is how I would classify it. He does have separation concerns and inconsistencies when it comes to separating against press coverage and against man, in my opinion. But he actually does pretty well against zone. And it's one of those case studies, Ian, where he was a guy that operated a lot more out on the outside during his collegiate career. But in today's NFL, do you see like a potential move to the slot for Keon Coleman being able to drive that value because of his contested catchability, his elite ability to be able to attack the ball at the apex of his jump and in traffic? I think he's a bully at the catch point where he can work the middle of the field. Now he has no problem working within congestion and traffic, and being physical at the catch point. We saw guys like who I see some similarities in physical profile, but in maybe some struggles against separating against man coverage during their collegiate days based on how they were used. But a move to the big slot from the outside in the NFL actually worked out really well in the cases of guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown out of USC, Juju Smith-Schuster, and even Rashee Rice, who operated mostly outside at SMU. Do you see Keon Coleman potentially having those traits that could move inside as a big slot and be effective because of some of his ability and nuance route running and beating zone coverage? Or is it something where you still think that he's best suited for outside services?
It's a great question. I think and Rashee Rice is an interesting one because he was another guy who, especially in college at SMU, had a lot more contested opportunities than he did with Kansas City. He was a guy who could go up and get it. And I actually liked his body control. I thought there were times when the hand technique was a little inconsistent, but he could corral it beyond his frame. But then he got to KC and they really, went full send on the rack threat, just getting the ball in motions, on mesh routes, little drags across the field, weaponizing that speed. I think Keon Coleman doesn't have the speed that he has, but I do still think Keon Coleman, for his size, right, 6'3", 210, is a really energized athlete in the short ranges who's very explosive, right? He gets up to speed quickly, and then especially in the short and intermediate ranges, that's where he can, be deadly for defenders. So I think looking at the rack profile for him as well, the contact balance, the forward pressing physicality, the agility, and the lateral twitch, I think that would be a great role for him, is moving him into that slot. But I think I would rather have him as a movement Z probably, because that way, we can get on the boundary for some reps, because that alpha contested catchability is so compelling with him, right? A lot of times they funnel the ball to him just to get him those opportunities. And that's where some of the volatility played into, just more opportunities gives you more losses, bare minimum. But at the same time, the basketball background, the ability to box out defensive backs with his frame and position himself, and then snare passes away from his frame, is second to none, in my opinion. I comp him to a Mohamed Massaquoi I think that's who I was going for. Oh, Muhsin Muhammad. That's why. Muhsin Muhammad. I knew it was an MM. I forgot for a second.
Very good.
Muhsin Muhammad. Yeah, that's the one, because I knew it was Moose Muhammad's dad. But Muhsin Muhammad. Yeah, I was watching some of his tape early on in his career. You're looking at a 6'2", 210 guy who doesn't have elite vertical speed, but he's explosive. He gets up to speed quickly. He can use that as a rack threat, really urgent strides. But then at the catch point too, when he was on his game, man, I mean, he could box anyone out. He could go up and high point the ball, the vertical athleticism. So I think Muhsin Muhammad is kind of your peak comp, your peak outcome for Keon Coleman, where he can play alpha on the boundary, but you can also get him some rack touches as well. So to answer your question, a little bit of both. I'm not in one camp or the other. I think moving him around and utilizing a skill set based on situation is the way to go. If you have a defense that's playing more off coverage, maybe you can move him outside and let him use that STEM IQ, because I do think he's shown he can use that. But if you have them playing more press man, maybe shift him into the slot where he gets a bigger cushion and you can just scheme him a quick touch and he can get out in space with that speed and that contact balance. I think there's multiple ways to use him, and that's the fun part of his evaluation, because there's so many possibilities.
Nice. Yeah, Coleman's been a head scratcher for me throughout most of this process. So,
it's tough, man. He's a polarizing player.
It's going to be fun to see where he lands. But I like your ranking for him. I certainly think that he's going to be provide a pretty great value and plenty of upside in late first round, early second.
Yeah. Some other rankings that make note in the top 50, Graham Barton, 24, 25 was Jackson Powers Johnson for me. They were really close as my top center, but I leaned with Barton. I had Byron Murphy II at 29, Nate Wiggins at 30, Tyler Guyton at 31, Christian Haynes from UConn making that 32. Big fan of his tape at guard. He's an absolute mauler. He's explosive, scheme versatile. I think he could be a day one starter. I had Tyler Nubin at 34. Darius Robinson at 38, Adisa Isaac at 40, a fun player from Penn State who I think is underrated. 41, this 41 to 50 range for me is really
right
where I see a lot of good football players, man. Jordan Morgan, who I think translates better to guard, but I comp him to Matthew Bergeron from last cycle, who was drafted by the Falcons and was a really good starter in year one. You've got Kingsley Suamataia, Leggett, Cole Bishop, Ben Sinnott from Kansas State, my tight end too. Big fan of him. Max Melton, Dadrian Taylor Demerson, Mike Sanders, still Zach Frazier, Roman Wilson. This group to me is one of those groups, like if you can get one of these players, right, maybe not round one guys, but guys that I would circle early on day two, because you're getting a day one starter with impact potential, in my opinion. Any names stand out to you in this group?
Max Melton. No. I've been a big fan of Max Melton for a while now, and I don't think that he's going to go in the first round, but I think you're getting one hell of a football player in the second round. I think anybody that is able to land him should be very, very happy and know that they're going to be getting somebody. I love his ability and his feel for off coverage. Yeah. I think his fluid hips. I like his. It seems to seamlessly change directions. And the footwork. It feels refined, but I love the instinctual element of his game too. Physical. There's a lot that I love about his bag heading into the NFL. So Max Melton is certainly a corner that is probably a little higher up as far as where I put him in the DB hierarchy. And I think it's a very good cornerback class, but Melton's a name that stood out to me throughout this entire process in the second round.
Yeah, him and Sanders still are probably two of my favorite corners in the entire class. Sanders still my favorite slot, because I think, again, one of the most intelligent DBs that I've watched when it comes to route leverage, passing off and carrying in zone. He can play nickel. He can blitz. He's physical and support. There's really nothing much that he can't do. And then Max Melton, I think you hit the nail on the head with the fluidity, right? Because he's 5'11", but he's got 32-inch arms, so he can transition really effortlessly with that frame. He's got elite vertical speed and explosion as well. But then he can get inside your frame and press man and in the slot too. So there's some versatility there as well. We get into the 51, 60, 70 range. This is where we see our first running backs. So I'm really curious to get your thoughts here, Derek, because this is your bread and butter. Trey Benson, my RB1 at 51. I did have Will Shipley. I'm a big Will Shipley guy, and I'm realizing that I'm kind of on an island there. So, but I was really struggling with that RB2 slot. I decided to flip Jonathan Brooks over Will Shipley on my final watch through. I think Jonathan Brooks' brand of physicality and durability translates a little bit better. I know he had his ACL tear, but reports are saying that he will be back to 100% there. Whereas with Will Shipley, it's not so much about a torn ACL or one big injury, but Shipley just struggled to stay healthy in his NFL career. So you wonder if the availability is going to stay the same at the NFL level, right? So I think that was where the difference was for me. I think Shipley has some CJ Spiller to him when he's in space. He's very explosive. He's got legit vertical speed. He's a long strider with that small, compact, streamlined frame. And inside congestion, he does have the hip fluidity to navigate, right? I think for him, it's just a comfort issue. There are a lot of times where he'll try and bounce it outside. The vision is good, but I just don't think he's as composed in congestion, working second level lanes like Jonathan Brooks is. Jonathan Brooks, he can stem blocks and use that bend and speed to offset DBs and then capitalize. And he's got grading play strength moving forward. I think Shipley is a little more versatile as a receiving back, and that's something that wins me over a lot. I like guys who can win in the passing game too. I think Shipley has that, one of the better receiving backs in the class. But for me, I think Jonathan Brooks probably profiles better as a 3-down back who can stay on the field. And so that was kind of the deal breaker for me.
So I understand the projection, and I certainly understand, bringing up Shipley's durability issues. I want to put them in quotations because it's not like he suffered major catastrophic injuries. In fact, Jonathan Brooks is the player that has one coming into the NFL. Yeah. But reports seem to be heading in the right direction. Hope for a speedy recovery, because I do think if we're projecting ceiling, I think Jonathan Brooks probably has a little bit higher ceiling than Shipley, but they're both very good football players. And I certainly see the flashes, and there's a reason why Will Shipley was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. I think it was Weddington High School in North Carolina. Dude, the flashes of burst and acceleration are certainly there, and I like his movement and elusivity in space. You mentioned congestion, though. I do think that there are some struggles working consistently in congestion. And while he has good power, I wouldn't classify him as somebody who's going to be able to overwhelm NFL defenders and NFL box defenders and linebackers with his strength, right? So it's something where I just see the ceiling being a little bit lower for Shipley, but the injury concerns with Jonathan Brooks make him one of the more puzzling players to try to figure out where to put him on your board.
Yeah. And it's kind of a representation of the medical evaluation is different for every player. Like Jonathan Brooks had this one torn ACL, but if he can get back to 100% and it proves to be a non-issue, that may be less concerning than a guy like Will Shipley, who left games early multiple times, missed time with multiple injuries, right? You wonder if he can stay healthy, right? You wonder if they're going to be nagging injuries that keep him from playing at 100%, throughout the season. Whereas with Jonathan Brooks, if he can rehab and get back to 100% and not re-aggravate that, he might be more durable on a week-to-week basis than Shipley, right? So it's tough. There's different layers to it.
Yeah. What's weird is with Jonathan Brooks, he didn't even start his final year as the starter. Yeah. But obviously once he did, he took that job and ran with it, and he actually kept Keelan Robinson, who is actually a really nice, space mover. I like his big play home run ability as a slasher. He kept Keelan Robinson basically off the football field when he was healthy. So Jonathan Brooks had a very impressive 1-year run, and it unfortunately ended in tragedy. But it looks like, like you said, things seem to be trending in the right direction. Hope for a speedy recovery for Jonathan Brooks, and certainly think he is a back that has a 3-down profile heading into the NFL.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of running backs, I figure I'll just move to our top 10 running backs, because this is one of those positions that's a little bit less aligned across the consensus, I think. So I wanted to give my top 10. Trey Benson, number 51 overall, my RB1. I really like his volume back profile, but I think he has some upside as a receiver too. And the size speed is very compelling. Jonathan Brooks, number 2. Will Shipley, my RB3. Dylan Lobby was my RB4, my final. Ooh. So I was a big fan of what he had to offer. I think he really projects well. RB5 is Bucky Irving. RB6 is Blake Corum from Michigan. RB7 is Isaiah Davis from South Dakota State. I'm a big fan of Isaiah Davis. I wanted to get him even closer to the top 100. Guys just stacked up in that range, so it was tough. But I think as a volume back, man, I think he has the vision, the creative instincts to be an NFL starter. So I'm a big fan of what he's to offer. RB8 was Jalen Wright from Tennessee, the speed, obviously. RB9 was Audric Estime from Notre Dame, another guy who I think fits that between the tackles, vertical mover, not elite vertical speed, but he's got the explosion, the contact balance where he can be a really good starter for a long time. And then my RB10 was Blake Watson from Memphis. He snuck in there. Still a big fan. I'm on the Blake Watson train. He's a very fluid, patient runner with really good receiving ability as well, so that can win me over with guys. You were looking at the RBs a little bit closer. Any rankings that caught your eye? And obviously there are a few guys farther down the list. Braylon Allen ended up being my RB17. So a little bit farther down the board. I know he's young. He's got the prototype profile, but not a ton of receiving versatility. And also, even as a power back, I do think there are times where, he's kind of veering on direction changes, not very much lateral agility, not very much creation freedom for me. I do think the profile is a little limited. So I put him below guys like Isaac Garendo, who I think has a little more bend to go with his speed, flexibility, testing those creases at the second level. Tyrone Tracy, who's a more versatile running back with the pass receiving ability and pass blocking. and then Ray Davis from Kentucky and Jayden Daniels from Monmouth. I think those two guys as well. Ray Davis is one of those guys who I think will be drafted in round 4, round 5 and be a really solid player. Jayden Daniels is that explosive powder keg who's actually very good in congestion, working with that dense, compact frame. So, and then Kimani Vidal from Troy, I forgot to mention, at number 12 overall for running backs, and Marshawn Lloyd at 11. It was just tough to stack up those guys, and some of them fell in the process.
Yeah, no, certainly your top 10 is interesting because it is one of the more polarizing positions in this class. It undoubtedly, unquestionably, you can ask, I think, poll 10 different people that are doing this for a living, right? And they are digging in and they see 10 different things with these running backs. Certainly, guys that you're probably a little bit higher on than me. Audric Estime is one that I see some of the ability. I like his feel actually in gap scheme runs, and I think he's plays faster than his 40 time. I see a guy that can hit doubles and triples on occasion if it's blocked up correctly. Love his contact balance too. I see and I see now where you're maybe like valuing the pass catching skill set, right? Dylan Labe, Bucky Irving, I think led all FCS running backs with receptions. I think it was 55 in 2023. Certainly kind of a versatile 3-down prospect. He's a little undersized though. And the athletic testing kind of pushed him down the board for me a little bit. I was disappointed with his explosive testing numbers a little bit, but I loved what I saw on tape. Marshawn Lloyd's a guy that you have at running back 11 that he's tough to figure out because of his ceiling. I see a ceiling where he could be a 3-down contributor in the NFL. I love his explosiveness and his agility and his creativity. It's just, I do have pass pro concerns. I do think he's fine as a pass catcher, but pass pro concerns could keep him off the football field. And then I still think that he has a little bit of a tendency to try to get greedy and bounce runs outside, a little bit too eager to do that on a couple different occasions from what I saw on tape. But I see the ceiling with him. Once upon a time, back when he was in high school, he was in the same conversation with guys like Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. So the talent is certainly there, and the flashes were there at USC. But I understand the red flags. Are some of those red flags what kind of pushed you outside of the top 10 for me?
Yeah, I think to your point, I think the security traits are a little bit more lacking with him. There's an injury history to take into account. There's a big fumbling problem to take into account, which at the NFL level, if you fumble once or twice, you're in the doghouse, and that can mean limited opportunities for you. So that's something you want to shore down too. And then also the pass blocking. I think he's really unique because, again, you mentioned the ceiling. He's like 5'8", 5'9", 215, right? So over 215. So he's a dense, compact guy. So you would think that he's one of those hard charging, low to the ground power backs, but he doesn't run like that at all. Stylistically, he's explosive. He's agile, incredibly agile. The creative ability is one of the best in the class. So you're thinking if we can get him to stay consistently available, consistently, secure, after, when he's running with that ball security, he can be a really good player, but it's just, there's too many questions for me to keep him in that top 10. I look at guys like Blake Watson, who I see, the immediate receiving upside. I see the vision and the creation ability between the tackles. I see the size defined contact balance, right? Dylan Labe. I see the receiving ability. Again, the really dense, compact frame, the ability to stem as a rusher. I think all those guys have elements that make them a little more secure than Marshawn Lloyd. And so that was kind of the tiebreaker for me.
Yeah, no, and other guys I like, though. I mean, and I totally understand the red flags pushing Marshawn Lloyd down a lot of people's board. Totally understand that. Kimani Vidal, though, I like him a lot. These players got to go somewhere, so I'm not knocking your rankings at all.
Sometimes when I'm working on top 300, I'll have a guy in like the 200, 225 range, and I keep saying like, I like this dude a lot. And I'm starting to get to the point where, you know what, just put him where you want to, man. Just put him where you think he deserves to go. And then that's like stop going with the consensus, do that own thing. So that's, I'm still working. And sometimes I get burned by that, right? But you want it to be your unadulterated opinion for sure. Yeah. And I think, with Kimani Vidal, the more I watch his game, the more I think, what does he lack, right? Aside from, top tier size. And even for his size, like 5'8", he's still really compact. He's got good mass. Right. He's an energetic runner, fleet footed, really good corrective athleticism and vertical explosion. But then he's got the vision and the second level ability as well. The contact balance, forward presser. Again, we like to see that. And he's got some receiving chops too. So again, the more I looked at his game, the more I'm thinking there's not much this guy lacks. And I think if you get a guy early to mid day 3, he's one of those running backs where in the right situation can be an immediate rotational presence and potential starter down the line.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, Vidal, you hit the nail on the head as the reasons why I like him. Ray Davis is another guy that I'm a little bit higher on, I believe, than a lot of folks have him on their board. He's in my top 10 running backs. And then there's Tyrone Tracy Jr., who we've talked about a couple times. I believe I see the path. I see the vision for his ceiling. And I love the fact that he changed positions over from wide receiver and doing his thing at Iowa to running back at Purdue. And the flashes were certainly there, and I think an NFL team has a lot to work with him entering the NFL. Sure, the reads aren't going to be a little clean. He gets a little greedy with his jump cuts and still tries to, slam on the brakes a bit too often instead of just trying to get upfield and maximize your yardage output. Tries to get a little greedy and tries to take every single one to the house. But there's a lot to like about Tyrone Tracy Jr.'s game entering the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. If we were doing a car analogy, like he's the guy who can get from 0 to 60 really quickly, right? He's got that top end speed for sure, and the change of direction, the turning ability, right? The handling of a tuner, But at the same time, kind of like a student driver, he'll veer a little bit, he'll drift a little bit, right? So you want him to be a little more efficient hitting those lanes, but the upside is definitely there. The receiving ability, the pass blocking, again, that's security. He's going to get on the field because coaches will be comfortable with him in that phase. So that's something there's so many different molds in this RB class, and that's the fun part. But we've got a little under 5 minutes. So Derek, any other names that you brought up? I know I was asking you to list some of your guys and where they're ranked so we could talk about them a bit. Any guys that stood out to you aside from that?
Two guys that I'm a really big fan of, and I've already talked about, Jalen Coker. But anytime you stick a microphone in front of my face heading into the 2024 NFL draft, Ian, I'm going to talk about Jalen Coker. Jalen Coker is certainly a guy that on day 3 coming out of Holy Cross, I want to keep an eye on. I love his explosive verticality. I love his ability to attack the ball away from his frame, body control. I see plenty of reactive athleticism at the catch point because quarterback play wasn't all that great at Holy Cross. But I also see a lot of route running nuance and STEM IQ, right? That suggests that I think he's going to be able to create separation at the NFL. So I'm very high on Jalen Coker. Another wide receiver bringing up, Javon Baker. Yeah. There are flashes that this guy could be a top 10 wide receiver in this class. The level of consistency, though, the drops drive me nuts with a guy that flashes such exceptional hand-eye coordination and attacks the football. But the level of consistency is a little bit frustrating. I also think that there's times where I don't think he always does a great job of consistently staying in his drive phase and can kind of, I think, signal, when he's about to engage in a break. Now, that's just something you can clean up a little bit more consistent in his drive phase, STEM IQ, and his hands. Like the hands have to be cleaned up because, again, drops on the football field. Speaking of a running back fumbling the football, you drop passes in the NFL, you're going to lose your reps pretty damn quick. Yeah. So Javon Baker is one that's very intriguing to me. I see the potential for him to really contribute as a low end wide receiver too at his ceiling. But I also see the pitfalls and some of the concerns that can keep him off the football field. Intriguing wide receiver out of UCF.
Yeah, for sure. And I had Baker sneak into my top 100th overall. He graded well enough across the board for me. I think without elite vertical speed, you're going to want him to refine his route running consistency a little bit more in the hand consistency because he might have to rely on those types of catches, right? But I saw a guy with a good release package, with a good route running arsenal, with those high end flashes of catching instincts are definitely there. So he can get himself in a position. It's just converting time and time again. I see the rack ability with that dense frame, right? So I do think there's enough athletically to work with, and I think he can be a really good wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Jalen Coker was one of those guys after Jamari Thrash, who I really like Thrash's route running and fluidity. So that's what made him that wide receiver 21 for me. But after that, I was like, I like Coker's route running better than Brendan Rice. I like his size and wingspan better than Taj Washington and Luke McCaffrey as well. McCaffrey's versatile, but Jalen Coker to me is one. The more I watch him, the more I'm thinking like he's a top 150 guy. And early day 3, if you want to take a swing on this guy, I think he can go on to really give you dividends for that. So a fun receiver class. And real quick before we go, I'm just checking the numbers here. I had 18 receivers in my top 100, I believe. And then I think 42 in the top 300 overall. So this is a good class. Need a receiver, a corner, offensive lineman. Those are the deeper positions. It's a fun one for sure. Any closing thoughts before we send out our listeners today, Derek?
No, this is a fun one. I feel like we can keep talking and talking and talking, but eventually we have bills to pay. We have other things to do. We have other prospects to dig into, even with less than 2 weeks away from the 2024 NFL draft. So let's just tune in next week. We got one or two more episodes before the 2024 NFL draft, and we're going to talk a little bit more ball. So it's going to be exciting.
Yep, we got to talk at length about the players today. Next week, before the draft, we will have a pre-draft preview. So we will talk more about situations, mainly for round 1. But it's going to be fun, because there's so much to dive into with that as well. But that's all we have for you today. If you want to see the full top 300, the big board is updated on the site, and we will update it again next week to add any guys past the top 300 that you want to get your eyes on. So until next time, thank you everyone for listening. Peace out. Have a good one.